This week on Half Step Down, Renee exposes our new marketing strategy.
Force it down everybody's throats.
Jose goes all in.
120%.
And the boys talk about an old favorite.
Yeah.
Was it Salute Your Shorts?
Salute Your Shorts.
Salute Your Shorts was the shit.
All aboard the nostalgia train, 90s kids. Today we're talking about Nickelodeon. Half Step Down starts now.
Shayla writes her notes down, and then when she gets home, she rewrites them in different colors.
Yeah, stuff like that is what helps you remember.
Yeah. That's one thing that I've learned for myself, being differently abled, is that's one of the hardest things I have tried to overcome, is the idea that I can't write things down. I try, like during classes, I'll write things down just to remind myself, but I don't get to look them over because my handwriting's so much sloppier now than what it used to be. So I just like try to force myself to write something, and then hopefully that sticks to my mind.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I have to like type it at, I don't know. It's I'm still trying to find that base on how I like take notes. I think the note taking is probably the hardest thing, because I mean, for people with disabilities like myself, we can, some accommodations are like note takers, but in all honesty, that never helped me. They just send me the notes and I just read them over. It didn't register with me. Just like you said, like having to write things down is a lot easier. It's easier to pick up on those things.
Yeah.
But on that note, I do want to say one thing before we start the top of the show. Happy birthday, Jose.
Thank you.
We don't get old, we only level up.
There it is.
And so everybody give this guy a shout out, give Jose a shout out online and stuff, but we'll talk about that a little later. But welcome everyone to Half Step Down, where two aging punk rockers talk about pop culture and punk rock. We are your co-hosts, Renee Grano and the birthday boy, Jose Martinez. How are you doing today, man? Are you ready for your birthday weekend?
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward. I was telling you earlier, I'm heading out to Santa Monica with the kids. Hopefully it's not too crowded and we don't turn around immediately. But there is a burrito place out there that I've been wanting to try. That looks like it's got a killer surf and turf burrito, so I'm excited.
You can't go wrong with the surf and turf burrito.
It's good.
Cannot go wrong. Jose, this is an episode to me that is, I believe, for the both of us, is very near and dear to our hearts, because we are going to be talking about nostalgia, and I think that that's one of the biggest things, in my opinion, when it comes to punk rockers and to a lot of these, outsider cultures into popular culture, is nostalgia. And I think nostalgia is very big, and I think this is one of the biggest ones that you and I are going to be talking about, and that is 90s Nickelodeon.
Yes, so today we're definitely taking a nostalgic look back at the Nick of our childhood.
Of our generation.
Yeah. Late 80s, early 90s. Let me give you a little backstory on the channel, and then we'll talk about it. So, Nickelodeon was named after the 5-cent movies that were popular in the early 1900s. It was originally created by Dr. Vivian Horner and started off as a community channel with only one show, a show called Pinwheel, which is aimed at preschool education. In 1977, it was a commercial-free network that basically ran on like a small market, I think somewhere in the Midwest. It was successful enough to expand into a full channel, and it officially launched in 1979. It was marketed as the first network for kids. It was on the Warner Cable system. It gets complicated at this point in that certain different companies started buying like stakes in the company. It was like half owned by AT&T and half owned by this other company at one point. But what's important for our purposes today is that the Nickelodeon that most people probably remember from the 80s and 90s, that big orange splat, didn't really start until 1984. At this point, it became its own channel, having the kids stuff during the day with Nick at Night, which I think you and I have been big fans about.
Yeah.
This is also the year they started accepting traditional advertising. Before then, I think it was not as... It was more like educationally based. And today, Nickelodeon has grown into a media empire responsible for some of the most famous kids programming of all time. Which brings me to the question that I think you need to ask me now, man.
Aside from nostalgia, why did we decide to choose 90s Nickelodeon?
Yeah, I mean, what is a show about pop culture and punk rock? These two Asian dudes talking about kids show from the 90s. Well, this really was the outsider channel. At least that's what I remember it as. There was the Disney Channel, and there was like the Disney like whole aesthetic, and then there was Nickelodeon, at least at my school.
Well, yeah, there was no Cartoon Network yet, right? Well, it was around, but it was just Cartoon Network hadn't blown up yet.
Well, I don't think Cartoon Network at the time had. I think it was just old reruns of Looney Tunes and Hanna-Barbera.
Yeah, a lot of basically Boomerang before they created Boomerang.
It was basically Boomerang, and then I'm sure we'll do an episode on Cartoon Network at some point. Yes. Because once Cartoon Network started Cartoon Network Studios, I think they basically took over the mantle of what Nickelodeon was doing, or at least expanded on it. And when we get into the influence of some of these shows, I'm sure we'll talk about, like Adult Swim, Adventure Time, like some of the more famous Cartoon Network cartoons. There's a lot of that comes from here. So either way, one of the cool things about this network was that it was basically a network designed for kids that wasn't necessarily just what you would see in other kids' programming. So you watch Saturday morning cartoons, they were like Looney Tunes, or it was like Transformers, Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe. Nothing wrong with that, but those are basically walking commercials, kids trying to buy toys and stuff. The stuff on Nickelodeon was not like that. They were shows, I think the best way I saw it described was that they were not shows that were talking down to kids. They were like shows that were tried, or at least that tried to be made from a kid's point of view. And that was something really cool. If you grew up in that time and you saw those shows, you're like, dude, this is weird. There's something weird about that. And I think that sensibility definitely goes into the kind of music we listen to, the punk rock kids, the metal kids. I think that was a big part of it. And we're definitely going to talk about some of these shows because that influence is clear in a lot of them.
Yeah, that definitely starts to show itself at the older you get, right? Because I feel like as when you're a kid, and science has proven, right? Like, kids' minds are easy to mold, and whatever it is that you're watching says a lot about you as you grow up. And you're absolutely right when it comes to the aesthetic of punk rock and Nickelodeon and the things that we watched in the 90s, especially the cartoons that we watched in the 90s from Nick. It says, there's a lot of big, I would say there's a lot of big, there's no big gaps between the two. And I think we're going to be talking about that towards the end too, especially on one specific cartoon that definitely has taken over Nickelodeon over the last 2 decades or so. Yeah. And some of the great people that have guest starred on that stuff. So that says a lot about it. So.
Definitely. Yeah, man.
Yes. So let's
awkward pause. Sorry.
So let's jump into. Do you want to jump into the list already and into some of these cartoons that or shows actually, because they're not just cartoons, right? We also have some live action stuff. Some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today.
Before we do that,
do you want to go list by list?
Before we do that, let's talk about your first memories of this network.
Oh, yes, our first memories. Yeah. Well, do you want me to? I'll go first. How's that? Well, I'll talk about my first memory.
I know we're on a podcast. I pointed at you via the thing, but I don't think you saw me.
Yeah, I was staring away from you first.
I point right at the camera.
Today, I'm having technical difficulties today. I'm actually talking to Jose through my cell phone, and I'm recording through my laptop, and I am speaking. My microphone is connected to something else. It's all over the place right now. But
it's been a long week, and we're starting later than we normally do, ladies and gentlemen. So just bear with us.
I apologize, everyone. I apologize ahead of time. But you know what? As the last 2 professional podcasters, you can't go wrong. We are the standard. We are the standard of professional podcasting. Well, when it comes to late night podcasting, I guess.
Absolutely. 120%.
Gosh, dude, my first memory of Nickelodeon, in all honesty, has to be two shows, and that's Ren and Stimpy and Rugrats. Rugrats and Ren and Stimpy are the two shows that I just, as a kid, were just in love with. And Ren and Stimpy, I still, and we'll talk about that as when it comes on. I think that's going to be a long segment, but the love that I have for Ren and Stimpy is huge. But those are the two that I remember as a kid. As I got older into my tweens, The Adventures of Pete and Pete, and a bunch of other stuff like that. But Nickelodeon was definitely the thing that I want to come home to and watch every Saturday morning or Sunday night, whatever it was. Like, there was always something to watch on Nickelodeon. So I just remember being, just being one of the fortunate ones, right, to be able to have cable to watch Nickelodeon at the time.
Yeah, growing up, I don't remember cable being a constant at my house until maybe I was fifth or sixth grade. But I remember at some point we must have had it, because the earliest memories I have of that network are a show about these time traveling koalas. I have a very vivid memory of this koala turning the little gear on a watch, and the sun and moon rotating backwards. There was a weird show about these mannequins that came to life in a department store after everyone left.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that.
And I could not, for the life of me, find what that was. Although, when I looked up old Nickelodeon, so many different things started coming back to me. The other thing I remember is this show called Dave the Gnome. I found some YouTube videos and some websites talking about it, and that brought back a flood of crazy memories. But those were my earliest memories. And then just knowing that there was a network for kids, and I remember when I was a kid thinking like, "Wow, someone made a network for me." But those were my first impressions, first memories.
The only mannequin I can I remember the mannequin show, but the only mannequins that I remember that would come to life are in Doctor Who. Do you remember that episode, the Christopher Eccleston Doctor Who?
I remember that, yeah, man.
I think that's the first episode of that season, I think.
That's the first episode of the reboot, yeah.
So the reboot, yeah. Yeah, you know, that... There's a sitcom that I remember. So in the 90s, they would do like these flashback segments or these flashback hours, and I don't know if they did it often, but I specifically remember a sitcom that was on Nickelodeon. I guess it was from the late 80s, and I just remember one specific line from it, but that's all I remember. Like, I don't remember anything else but that. And I just remember watching that. And another thing that I remember, too, are the game shows. The game shows were a big deal back in the day for Nickelodeon. And I also want to point out to the audience that Jose and I are only 4 years apart, but I feel as you get older, that gap isn't as big as when it is when you're a kid. So I think that we also need to tell the audience that your Nickelodeon years are a little different than mine, because as a kid, 4 years is a big, big difference.
Yeah.
Right? Like 4 years, when you're 12 and I'm 8 years old, my Nickelodeon was definitely different at the time than yours was.
And I got to just say now, because I Googled it again, and this must be it. It was called Today's Special. I don't remember it looking like this, but again, that was a very early memory. But I am seeing a mannequin coming to life. This must be what it was. But Today's Special. Okay. I remember this guy's hat. This has to be it. But again, memory is a weird thing when like, especially when you're a kid, you have these very vivid memories. This has to be it. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. But
the thing, like I was saying, man, when I was researching some of this stuff, so many things came back. When we get to the Pete and Pete episode, I'm going to talk about that was a nostalgia trip of like crazy proportions.
Yeah. And it's funny because we'll get into that when we get there. But let's get into the TV shows. Let's get into the shows that we remember and the ones that we want to talk about. Because again, it is our show. And as the last two professional broadcasters, we don't like to put fluff in our episodes.
No.
We want to get straight to the point. and talk about the shows that we love and force it down everybody's throats. That's
absolutely. All right, first
Number
show.
one.
First show. No particular order here, guys. Doug. You remember Doug?
I need more. The beats. I need more allowance.
There it is.
Come on,
there
of
it
course
is.
of course I remember the beats. Wow. Of course I remember Doug. Yeah.
So it ran from 91 to 1994 in the OG Nick version, not the Disney Doug version. That is a very different show.
Very different.
The show was about a kid named Doug Funny whose family moves into a new town, and he has to adjust. My first memory of this, I think this was the first episode. Do you remember when Skeeter takes Doug to the Honker Burger?
Yes, that's the first episode.
Is that the first episode? And
yeah, that's when his neighbor tells him how to get to Honker. Is it Honker Burger? Is that what it is?
It's called Honker Burger.
Okay, Honker Burger. Yeah, that's the first one. Yeah, that's the first episode.
And I remember Doug couldn't order because it had its own language, and Skeeter had to order
its own language. I remember that.
It was a strange. I mean, I don't want to say it was a strange, but I remember that being the first cartoon that was made for kids, but was dealing with issues that kids have. It wasn't just about adventures and stuff. This dude had crushes on girls. He was trying to figure out how to look cool, and it was like a. I don't know how else to describe it. Is if it's it was like a sitcom for kids, but as a cartoon.
Yeah, I agree.
A lot of these shows had that.
Yeah, I think this one in particular, though, I definitely agree with you. This one in particular definitely had touched the subjects that maybe early teens and teenagers had, right? Falling in love with Patty Mayonnaise and dealing with Roger, which is the bully, and having your best friend and tackling school and wanting to be a your adventures of his ideas of wanting to be a journalist and all of that stuff are all his first date, all that stuff are things that looking back at it is something that I would show my kids and be this is, and it's kind of this show was definitely the one show I think out of the group that really tackled those subjects. Yeah, definitely agree with you on that.
Yeah, there was an episode where they went to somebody's pool party and no one wanted to go in the pool. And this is something that I remember having this thought later in life, in middle school, going to a pool day, is Doug basically in so many words was just well, fuck it. I'm just going to take off my shirt and jump in the pool and have fun, and hopefully everyone else will. And then once he jumped in, that crowd mentality that kids have, oh, it's okay to do this. But I had never seen a show like that up until then. My other favorite shows were G.I. Joe and Ninja Turtles, and they were fighting all the time.
Yeah.
So to see a cartoon deal with that stuff was kind of oh, that's kind of, again, a good example of the network making shows for kids that weren't just mindless in a weird way.
Yeah. My first memory of Doug has to be Quail Man. That's when I think of Doug, I just think of Quail Man, Silver Skeeter, and Quail Dog. That just his alter ego, right? His comic book is what he would write. Yeah, that was definitely my first one. And just the fact that Pork Chop was essentially the Nickelodeon version of Snoopy.
Yeah. And I mean, the theme song was great. The fact that he kept a journal. I remember trying to keep a journal for a while after watching that show, but I couldn't do it every day. I actually do have something I write in every once in a while, but it's not daily. He used to write in it Doogie Howser style, every day.
Yeah, that's true. That was a good show.
And we got to talk about the Beats, right?
Ahead.
The Beats.
I Need More Allowance. That's the one song I remember from the Beats.
I remember Where's My Sock.
Oh, that's right.
And there's one episode. The one episode I really remember is it's him and Skeeter. They win a contest to see the Beats live in concert, but it's in another town. Mm-hmm. And they had to
meet them in the show.
They meet them, but they went through hell to get there. A cop had to take them, and I remember the cop's I remember Where's My Sock because the cop in the car was where's my sock? it's my sock he's talking about.
That's right, because wasn't he a roadie for the Beats?
He was a roadie for the
that?
Beats or something, yeah, and it was
That's
just like
right,
nuts.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember I Need More Allowance because that was the song that they would put on Nick to promote the show.
Yeah.
That's
Great
on my
show.
list this week on my playlist.
Oh, we got to talk about that
More
playlist
Allowance.
at some point.
Yeah.
Well, obviously we will at the end.
Yes. Yeah. How about the next show? You want to move on to the next one?
So the next one we talked about was Rugrats. Ran for 9 seasons starting in 1991. It has apparently been rebooted and is running again, and it did have a spin-off, I believe, called All Grown Up, where the kids all grow up.
It was pronounced All Growed Up.
All Grown Up? Okay, All Grown Up.
Yeah, All Growed Up.
Where the kids grew up. Now they're in high school. They're skateboarding. They're doing teenagery things. The theme song by the great Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo. This one was, you said you really liked the show and it was one of your first memories.
Rugrats was definitely my first memory. Whenever Rugrats was on Nickelodeon, I sat and watched. My love for the Rugrats as a kid was huge. It was definitely my the first thing that I loved when it came to cartoons was Rugrats. I had Rugrat bed sheets. I remember begging my mom at Montgomery Ward to buy me these Rugrat bed sheets, and one of them was Tommy. One of the pillowcases was Tommy. The other one was Chucky. And I remember crying my eyes out wanting these bed sheets, and my grandma was the one that ended up buying them for me. But that's why I remember Rugrats so vividly, because my sister-in-law, every opportunity she gets, she always makes fun of me. She's like, "You were such a baby. I want the Rugrat sheets." Apparently she was there she was there with me and my grandma and my mom, and she was like, "I remember looking at you," because I think she was engaged to my brother at the time, and she's like, "Oh, this kid just got his way." But yeah, I was just begging and pleading for the Rugrat sheets. But my first memory of Rugrats, I remember Chucky was my favorite. I remember Phil and Lil just being disgusting because they would just eat everything off the floor.
Yeah.
And then Tommy I remember not liking Tommy as a kid because I was like, dude, poor Chucky. Like, Tommy's the reason he's so scared.
Yeah.
He was just so anxious, you know? Yeah. But my first memory has to be... I don't even think I have a first memory of Rugrats, like looking back at it. Just the show itself. I just remember it being a big part of my life as a kid.
There is an episode of Rugrats, and I cannot remember. I got to look up this quote. But I remember Angelica telling the kids, "If you have to ask, you'll never know." And just thinking that's the dumbest, weirdest thing I'd ever heard. And I remember that, and wondering, like, what did that even mean?
Yeah.
But I do remember, like, Angelica was just completely, like, she would just be torturing these kids. I have this memory of the episode where Chucky gets his first haircut, and Angelica pulls a hair from his head, and it hurts, and she's like, "Imagine that for every hair." And then he was just freaked the fuck out and did not want to go.
Yeah, I remember the booster shot episode when Tommy had to get a booster shot and Angelica went as well, and she was just petrifying them. And I remember they gave him like a lollipop, and the booster was, they were sucking on the lollipop, and the doctors give him the booster shot, and he's like, "Oh, that's it," kind of like, "Oh, that's nothing." As soon as Angelica comes out, just bawling because she was in so much pain. I remember that. I remember when the Christmas one where she would scare them because saying that Santa Claus was going to bring them coal because they were bad.
Yeah.
Angelica was nuts, bro. She was crazy.
Dude, yeah, she would not mess around, and she was just brutal on these kids. Yeah.
And speaking of Angelica, there's a rumor. There was a rumor. There was a theory, a Rugrats theory about Angelica, right?
So this came up a couple years ago when Tumblr was a big thing.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing this and thinking, wow, this is dark. So get ready for this. So
speaking of Tumblr, make sure you go to the Half Step Down website.
there you go, which is hosted on Tumblr.
Yeah.
Because it's easy.
Exactly.
All right, so this is the theory. It's none of the babies in Rugrats actually exist, but they are all instead figments of Angelica's imagination as a result of her parents' negligence. Chucky died with his mother, which explains how much of a nervous wreck his father is. Tommy was a stillborn baby, which explains why his father, Stu, was always in the basement making toys for the son he never had. And then finally, the DeVilles had an abortion. To compensate for not knowing the sex of the baby, Angelica invented twins in her head, one boy, one girl. Which is dark as shit.
Oh, that's so fucking dark, dude. Speaking of Tommy's dad, I remember Reptar. Don't forget Reptar, bro.
Reptar, the Godzilla basically thing that was like his favorite toy.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember that. I also remember
going to an. Go ahead.
What I was gonna say, I remember the episode where, like the babies are running around without diapers, and he goes up to the girl baby and goes, "Hey, I have a question," and then it like cuts off, and it's like
I remember going to an FYE at the mall, and this is when FYE changed to more like pop culture stuff, just like Hot Topic, and they sold Reptar bars, and I said I have to get myself a Reptar bar. I want to see if my tongue is going to turn green, and I remember it's just like caramel with green food coloring inside the Reptar bar, and it was just so nostalgic for me. It was like 3-4 years ago, and I was like, I want to eat this Reptar bar. I want to buy this whole box, even though there was just like a regular candy bar with caramel in it. Oh, yeah. But I remember Reptar bars were a big deal in the show too, because they make your tongue go green.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. The parents were crazy. Were pretty interesting too, right? I mean, you had Tommy's mom and dad, Dee Dee Pickles and Stu Pickles, and then you had Angelica's parents, who I don't remember. I know they were brothers. The dad and Tommy's dad were brothers, and then you had Phil and Lil's mom and dad, and you can definitely tell that the mom had. Remember, the mom had the female logo on her sweater all the time.
Yeah.
And then you also had Chucky's dad. Yeah, just looking. Yeah, I remember all that. So yeah, that show is definitely a big part of my life.
It was a big one, man. That was a big one.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Speaking of another big one, okay, let's get. What's the next one?
So the next one we have. This is gonna take a while. So this is probably the show most associated with Nick in the '90s, and that was Ren and Stimpy. So it ran from '91 to '96 in its original form. Basically a show about a dog named Ren and a cat named Stimpy that was basically off the fucking rails.
Yeah.
Just a disclaimer. We are going to be talking about the show. We will not get into John Kay and his sordid past. But there's nothing that can take away from the influence of the show, despite John Kay being basically a creep.
Mm-hmm. He did the first 2 seasons alone, right? And then he sold the show.
I think he did the first 2 seasons through his company, and then Nickelodeon. Yes. From what I remember, I think his company was still involved, but he basically just got pushed out.
He got pushed out. Yes,
he was basically like, from what I understand, was just a nightmare to work with. And is basically a creeper. You can look up all the shit about John Kay on your own, but
he's
out there. So
yeah, he's out there.
But again, man, the show was so ahead of its time, and we'll talk about it. Tell me about your memories, and we can talk about how influential I think the show is.
Well, first off, I also want to set a disclaimer that we will not be talking about the Spike TV reboot, because to me that doesn't exist.
Right.
They ruined it. I'm angry that they ruined it, and I remember not watching. Well, I guess I am talking about it, but that's something that I don't want to talk about. That'll be something else for another episode, I guess. Things that we hate, and that's definitely something that I hate. But my first memory was "Don't Whiz on the Electric Fence." That was that, and the "Happy Happy Joy Joy" song.
Yeah,
those are my first two memories of Ren and Stimpy.
Happy Happy Joy Joy was one of those things that I think was. Yeah, I mean, first of all, that episode was the episode where I think like Stimpy invents a helmet to make Ren happy. And just watching Ren's face contort every time he has to be happy. One of the things that this show invented was the grotesque close-up. You see it all the time now in like SpongeBob, bunch of Adult Swim shows. When they'll do a super close-up, it's basically a meme before a meme. And this show basically invented it. But one of my all-time favorite things about Happy Happy Joy Joy is the line, "I told you I'd shoot, but you didn't believe me. But why didn't you believe me?
Why did you believe me?"
And it was just like that was a kid's show. And there was just so many things in that show that were, I mean, pre the Spike TV like adults version of Ren and Stimpy. So much of that show rode the line. I mean, it was a bunch of controversies because it was gross out humor, but it was just absurd and crazy.
As a kid watching that show, I didn't think of it that way. I watch it till this day. This is the one show on from Nickelodeon, from my past, that as from what we're talking about, obviously this is the longer one, but Jose and I we love this show. We still remember the show. I still watch it. I have the first 3 seasons on DVD, which are in a box in my closet. There's a handful of DVDs that I hold on to because I don't want to get rid of them, and that's one of them, right? Those and The Adventure of Pete and Pete. But the extreme close-ups are the one that will some of them that stick to my mind are like Stimpy's magic nose goblins.
Oh yeah.
When Ren's teeth are totally decayed and they just fall apart, and he smiles for the first time, and it's just like this nasty close up of everything in his mouth. Those are just some of the few that I remember, even as a kid, just be like, oh my god, you know. But as I got older, I'm like, what the fuck am I watching? And yet I still cannot not watch Ren and Stimpy. It's so funny. Like, if you step away from the grotesque, it's a very funny show. Like, a rubber nipple salesman is hilarious.
No, and that's the thing. The show was funny. Like, and it was one of the first shows that I remember, like, adults would watch it and like it. It was like a kid's show that it's one of the first shows where I remember, like, I somehow very closely associate it with the typical Gen X kind of like grunge rocker dude or whatever, because it was the type of thing where like adults would watch the show the same way like now adults would watch like Adventure Time or like Steven Universe or whatever. Like it was the first show of that I remember. I remember my mom found it funny. It was just to give you an example, one of Mike Judge said that this was one of the shows that was a prime influence for him to create Beavis and Butthead. Seeing like that you can kind of get away with this stuff and it'll work.
Speaking of Mike Judge and Ren and Stimpy and Beavis and Butthead, it's so the impact that these shows, like aside from Ren and Stimpy, Beavis and Butthead as well, the impact that they had in 90s culture, they're bringing them back on Comedy Central. We spoke about that in one of our Ramble episodes. Like, just imagine the impact that these two shows had, that they can come back and hopefully not disappoint.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
I mean,
I have a very interesting story about Ren and Stimpy. I want to say about 3-4 years ago, my nephews were all in high school, and I said, hey, so my nephews' ideas of I guess you can say nerd culture or outsider culture are all based on me. I introduce a lot of things to my nephews now that they're getting older. Like, I have some nephews that I've introduced, like Revenge of the Nerds, Ghostbusters, Terminator 2, some of the animes that I've watched, cartoons, things like that. And one of the things that I've showed them, that a lot of 80s stuff, I guess I've shown them a lot of 80s and 90s things that obviously they didn't grow up on. And I said, have you guys ever seen Ren and Stimpy? What's that? And I was like, okay, I'm going to show you guys Ren and Stimpy. But the one I was like, what episode do I watch them to make them think, what the fuck is my uncle showing me? Right? So I went in and I did Stimpy's Fan Club. And I don't know if you remember that episode, but the episode is basically Ren and Stimpy at this point break the fourth wall and are receiving fan mail from fans of the show, of Ren and Stimpy. Uh-huh. And Ren doesn't have any letters, and so he goes, hey, why don't you become the president of my fan club? And Ren just gets angry with some of these kids, and at the end of the show, he has this like moment of just of basically going crazy and wanting to kill Stimpy, and it's just like the most dark, in my opinion, the darkest scene I've ever watched in Ren and Stimpy. And I remember just watching it with my nephews, and they're like, what the fuck is going on? And they're like, you watched this as a kid? I go, dude, yeah, like this was my Nickelodeon, guys. Like, it's not like your Nickelodeon now. There's a big difference. And I just remember freaking them out. Yeah. They one of them still watches it, but the rest, they couldn't do it. I think I should have eased them in a little bit, but I didn't. I chose not to.
It's weird. I mean, I always remember Space Madness.
Yeah, Space Madness.
And just you're basically watching someone go crazy, and it is just one of those. It's one of those shows, man, that it's just like, yeah, I can't even describe it. It's like one of those once in a lifetime kind of things where it's like, oh, you see this thing happen. How it made it onto a kid's network is beyond me, but I'm really glad it did, because I think so many of the, I don't know if you would have the kind of adult cartoons, like we've already talked about Beavis and Butthead, right? But I don't know if you would have a lot of the Adult Swim stuff, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Metalocalypse, if you didn't have
Rick and Morty now.
Yeah, I mean that's what this is, for sure.
But there's also some episodes that are a lot more child friendly. Like you have, there's. It's really funny that I'm mentioning this, but like Ren and Stimpy, in some way has levels of it. Has different levels to each episode. Like being a rubber, like them being rubber nipple. Well, I can't even say rubber. I'm saying rubber nipple salesman, to go out and just sell rubber nipples, right? The ones that you put on bottles. Right. And they're just going out there and selling. But outside of just the fact that they're selling rubber nipples, when you watch the episode, it seems more wholesome than some of the other episodes. But outside of them selling rubber nipples, right? But then you have another layer where you had the character that never showed his face, right? They only showed his legs down. Yeah. And then he shows a walrus, and the walrus goes, "Call the police!" Like he's just petrified for his life, you know? Yeah. And so I can talk about the show all day, but it's one of the greats.
No, and that's something that and we'll talk about this when we get to Pete and Pete. But there's something that this network did really well is that these are obviously kids shows, but they deal with some heavy topics in a way that's very unique, and that you see now. When we get to Pete and Pete, I'll talk about it more time. But I see what you're saying with Ren and Stimpy for sure.
Yeah. So I recommend you guys go and watch Ren and Stimpy. I mean, it's talking about it, I think, can sometimes give people a weird, like, why would you want me to watch something like this? But in all honesty, guys, it's worth watching. Yeah, I think it's on Hulu. I might be wrong. I don't know if it's on Hulu now, but it used to be.
And it just like in general, man, the aesthetics of that show are seen all over. Like, you know what I mean? It's just it was hugely influential. So
yeah,
go
very well done. Very well done. Yeah. Speaking of the Adventures of Pete and Pete,
you want to go right into Adventures of Pete and Pete?
I'm on fire right now, guys. Let's do it.
Let's go. All right, we'll come back to Rocko's Modern Life. Let's talk about the Adventures of Pete and Pete. So,
okay,
Adventures of Pete and Pete ran from 1989 to 1996. It started off as 5 30-minute specials and a bunch of interstitials between commercials, and then later spawned about 3 seasons of TV. I think the 5 specials got integrated into the first season.
They did. That was essentially the first season.
This was besides Ren and Stimpy, this show for me was the most, the show I associate most with 90s Nickelodeon. Mm-hmm. It is probably one of the best kid shows I remember ever seeing. And so much of it, in the way it's like its tone, the way it like dealt with problems. Yeah. You see it all over stuff now. Renee, tell me about your first memories. I have a particular episode I want to talk about that I actually rewatched for this. And just some of the feelings that this show kind of gives me that I get from other shows now.
Well, thanks for getting me mid-drink. I appreciate that.
I can't see what you're doing, man. Your phone's pointed up at the ceiling.
Sorry. Yeah, well, because I don't know where to put it, guys. I don't want to put it in front of my screen. It gets all hot. It's like it's in my hand. I have nowhere to put it. But The King of the Road. That was my first. That's my first. My first thought. That and the theme song. Oh, speaking of I want to go back real quick to Ren and Stimpy. The theme song, awesome. One of the greatest theme songs in a cartoon ever, in my opinion, was the Ren and Stimpy theme song. And then you have. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in the Ren and Stimpy album, if you can find that,
yes,
please look that up.
Yeah, the You Idiot one,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, the King of the Road, the one where they're going on a vacation, and the dad has his elbow out by the window, and he says, "The further out, the more you feel like you're the king of the road. The further out you go, like the further your elbow gets stuck out." I remember that. I just remember when I was younger not liking the show, but as I got older, I watched a lot more of it, and I got more into it. That was The Night Stalker was one of my favorites.
Yeah, so, and this is a mistake on my part. I should probably mention what the show was.
Probably the weirdest
episode.
So
the show basically followed two brothers, Pete and Pete. Their dad, who was kind of like the stereotypical sitcom dad. Yeah. And their mom, who had a metal plate in her head. Mm-hmm. You had... it should be noted that little Pete has two tattoos. One of them is a dancing girl named Petunia. He had
on his forearm.
On his forearm, he had and also a full back tattoo of like a ship. They had their friend Ellen, who Big Pete. It was never like a romantic thing. They were like friends. There was some romance, you could tell, but that's one of the things that, like, when I looked up the show, I actually did a much deeper dive on this because the nostalgia on this one is huge. It perfectly captured that kind of time before you really like girls and you have a friend that's a girl and you don't know why you want to spend more time with her, but you know you do.
Yeah.
Like, it never got overly sappy and romantic, which is like what I would feel like a Disney show would do. But it rode that line perfectly. But so, like, one of the great examples for me, the episode that, like, honestly took me back was the Mr. Tasty episode. Do you remember the Mr. Tasty episode?
Yeah, I think we got cut off in the middle of my.
You did cut off a little bit. I don't remember if you were. Go ahead and finish your thought.
I'm sorry. What I said was the Night Stalker and the Mr. Tasty episode were the two episodes that I remember.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the two I remember the most.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do remember the Mr. Tasty. Yeah.
So I actually rewatched.
I remember it being so weird. Yeah.
I actually rewatched the Mr. Tasty episode, and one of the things that, this show brought back. So when I was looking this up, there's a piece of art, and let me look it up real quick while I'm doing this. So there's a piece of art for the game Earthbound, and I think I've talked about this. I think I've talked about this on the show before, but it's an image of the kids from Earthbound. It's a video game from Super Nintendo running around in the dark. And it says, basically the caption is, and we just spent the summer running through the streets and everything was perfect. I'll upload it on there. I forgot the name of the artist. Here we go. It's them running around, and it says, and we never got tired and we never got old. We just ran through the streets forever and everything was perfect. And when I saw that artwork, it immediately reminded me of Pete and Pete. the Mr. Tasty episode, I don't even think it was called the Mr. Tasty episode. I think it was called How I Spent Our Summer Vacation. And it's one of this great examples of, like, if you're a kid, summer is like a magical time. And to give you an example of how weird the show is, so the main plot of that show, or that episode, was when the summer comes around in this kid's town. On the first hot day, this guy named Mr. Tasty shows up. He's an ice cream salesman. He wears a giant plastic, like, soft serve head, and he never takes it off. Okay?
And he wears white gloves and a long sleeve.
Yeah. So you don't know who he is. Yeah. No one knows who he is.
Nope.
Ellen is working at a photo booth. Basically, is for our younger listeners, all maybe 4 or 5 of you. You used to have to get your pictures developed, and they would print them out on paper. So she sees that Mr. Tasty has dropped off photos. And they're like, you got to open the photos. We got to see what this guy looks like.
Yeah.
She opens the thing, the photos, and he's in his costume everywhere. It's him at the Statue of Liberty. Yeah. It's him, like, in Paris. It's nuts.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So then they're like, dude, who is this guy? He disappears, and then they basically spend the summer trying to figure out, because he doesn't want to get too close to the kids. In this episode, the girl from the B-52s, I forgot her name. I'm going to look it up. But she plays someone that claimed to used to love him, and she just walks around and calls him Leonard, like, Leonard, when will you come back to me? I need a blue tornado bomb. Another person.
It is that's right. It is the lead singer from the B-52s.
Yeah, I'm gonna find her name. You know who else is in this episode? Michael Stipe, the singer of REM. Because now, at one point, this is one of my favorite parts of this episode. In another just example of how batshit some of these Nickelodeon cartoons or, like, shows were. So after Mr. Tasty leaves, there's a day in the summer where they go to the beach, and the dad likes to look for, like, treasure with a metal detector.
Treasures. Yeah, and he always ends up picking up the mom's detect because she has a metal plate in her head.
Yeah, he talks about that's how he met his mother. Like, I was walking around looking for, after I came out of the army, I was looking and I found your mother. So in this episode, they're walking around the beach. The dad finds, while this is happening, Big Pete's talking to this other ice cream salesman, and it's Michael Stipe. And Michael Stipe is explaining to him, like, Mr. Tasty, the only guy, he's the only one that can get the blue tornado bombs, but you can have a sludge sickle. And he's like, why won't he become friends with us? And he's like, that's like the code of the ice cream salesman. We can't get too close to our customers. While this is happening, the dad is searching for, like, whatever, treasure.
Yeah, treasure. Yeah.
Finds a Cutlass Supreme. A Cutlass Supreme, an Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. He just finds it, they dig it out of the ground, and then they just drive home in a car that was perfectly buried.
That was perfectly buried.
And I'm like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
And but it was so awesome because, dude, like, as a kid, you don't understand where cars come from. It's almost plausible when you're a little kid to think, like, oh yeah, my dad just found this car. Lincoln says stuff to me sometimes. My son Lincoln, who's 4. I don't know, like, this is just like an example of, like, how absurd and beautiful kids' brains are. I don't know where he got it in his brain, but he thinks that I eat chicken bones. That I eat the bones of, like, whatever food. Oh, Dad'll eat them.
Yeah.
So it's like, dude, like, it's just, it perfectly captures the kind of wonder and, like, crazy imagination of kids, and that's my memory of it.
Yeah, The Adventures of Pete and Pete was one of those shows where I remember Little Pete's radio station was called Snot Radio.
Yeah.
I remember he would do, like, he was out there. Little Pete was out there. I remember him just being crazy. The Night Stalker episode was the episode that I, besides the Mr. Tasty one, but the Night Stalker episode was the one that really sticks into my mind, because it was just something that as kids we never wanted to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Why do we need a bedtime? And him and his friends were the ones that rebelled for a bedtime. And there was like the parents association, basically the PTA without the T in it. It was just the parents association or whatever. They're trying to figure out how to stop these kids from going to sleep, and one by one they start passing out, you know what I mean? And I just remember that episode to me was like, I don't want to go to sleep either. Like I remember as a kid, just that episode to me always stuck out because that's the one that I wanted to do. Yeah.
And one of the things that I had mentioned earlier is that Pete and Pete did really well. With the Mr. Tasty episode, at the end of the episode, they hang out with him, and he takes a picture of them, but then he leaves, and it's kind of melancholy. And a lot of the episodes ended with some melancholy to him.
Yeah, they did.
And it's a great example of a show like where like it's a kids show, but there's like sadness to it, and it reminded me of Adventure Time. There's an episode of Adventure Time called oh shit, I forgot. But it's the episode where they do the backstory of Marceline and the Ice King. Mm-hmm. And like, if anyone knows Adventure Time, spoiler alert, basically Ice King used to be like a normal person and helped raise Marceline, like when she was alone after like, and it's a really sad episode. And it's like, dude, like I remember feeling sad, and it's not a lot of like kid shows I feel like at the time were doing stuff like that. Yeah. We got to talk a little bit about some of the cameos that were on Pete and Pete.
Well, we have to talk about Artie first.
We'll talk about Artie, the strongest man in the world.
Yeah.
That's how he knew summer was over. Yeah. I remember because I used to do this. Do you remember that part? I do this to this day.
Is that the one where... No, I don't remember that part.
So the part... Because the whole episode's about how the summer... Like, what summer is like.
Yeah.
But, summer is officially over for Pete and Pete when they go to the beach and little Pete and Artie fight the ocean.
Oh, that's the summers. Oh, that's right. They used to fight the ocean.
And they're just in the water like punching it and like yelling at it, and it's amazing. Yeah. To this day, I don't know, I would do it every time I go to the beach. I would like kick and punch the water like as an adult, and I did not remember why I did it. And when I rewatched this episode, I'm like, holy shit. This got implanted in my brain at like 3 or 4.
I was going to say that to you. You read my mind, because when you said that, I just remember me and my friends in high school going to the beach, and I remember fighting the water.
Yeah.
And I always said, tell my buddies, like, let's fight the waves. He's like, let's do it. And we would just fight it. But he did it because I told him to do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what it is. It's because Pete and Artie used to fight the ocean. That's right. Holy shit. You know, like you said, as a kid, there's some things that you'll always remember, but there's just things as you get older, like, I used to do that. I wonder why. Why did I do that? And then you figure it out, right? Yeah.
Crazy. And then, Artie, the strongest man in the world, you got to talk about.
Yeah. Artie was special. Like, he was, I remember every time I watched Artie, I just laughed. Oh, yeah. Like, his physical comedy in that show was to a T. And for the longest time, there was a guy on a Seinfeld episode that was the Mattress King, or no, not the Mattress King, the Wiz. He was the Wiz, and nobody beats him. And for the longest time, I said, dude, that dude reminds me of Artie, like the way he would move and the way he talked. And maybe that's something I should look up, but I don't know if that's the same. If that's the same actor, I don't think it is. But the way he talked and he goes, "I'm the Wiz," it just always reminded me of Artie. Yeah, I know exactly. Just the way, because Artie in the Mr. Tasty episode fought a bee. Like it just that's right. Yeah, he was great. He was great, and I'm gonna just go through some of the other shows he's been on. So he was on King of the Hill. He was in Jerry Maguire. He's been in a bunch of stuff. And I bet, dude, he's got to be one of those actors where I bet you I've seen him a million times. And obviously now he looks very different, but he was just this skinny, weird dude. He made the show like just that much better. Yes, I agree. All right, we got to go through some of these cameos. Janine Garofalo, okay, played a smug teacher. We had J.K. Simmons. Pete needed a haircut.
and it was played by J.K. Simmons. LL Cool J played a cool teacher at their school. Steve Buscemi played a reoccurring role as Ellen's father. Iggy Pop acts as Nona's overprotective father, and in a video,
That's right.
it was Iggy Pop.
That's right. Yeah,
And
he was in the Night Stalker.
Yeah, apparently had such a good time on the
Or
show.
the Nightcrawlers. Yeah.
That he just stuck around. He like wouldn't leave, and like he's like, hey, if you want me to be in another scene, I'll be in another scene. Apparently, he just had the best time.
That's right. He was in the Nightcrawler episode, right?
Yeah. Sid Straw, Vincent Pastore, Selma Blair, Michael Stipe, Chris Elliott, Debbie Harry, James Redhorn, Gordon Grano, and David Johnson, who was in the New York Dolls. Like, it's just like,
wow. The influence that like I said earlier like I said at the beginning of the show, the gap isn't that big between outsider culture and this decade of Nickelodeon. Most definitely.
and I think it comes from this place of like, the show wasn't dumb. Like, it wasn't trying to sell kids on stuff, and it really kind of celebrated the absurdity of being a kid. A lot of the Nick shows did that. But this is the one that I thought really set that template. And I remember, like, watching those shows now. Like, when I rewatched that one episode, it kind of re-sparked that feeling of, like, being young and when everything's new and you're not really sure of stuff. And that was the show for me.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I definitely agree with you. That was that's definitely my top three. I think out of the three shows that we spoke about so far are by far my favorite, my top three shows that I remember from Nickelodeon. Yeah.
Yeah, these are for sure. We got to talk about the big one at the end, but I'm going to rapid fire through some of these. Is that cool? Because we're at an hour.
I was going to tell you, we don't have to put this in the show, but I was going to tell you, do you want to just do a part two?
Should we?
I think we can do a part two.
I don't know. I mean, we could talk about some of the other stuff, but I don't know, man, because there's not as much for Rocko's Modern Life or All Real Monsters or Hey Arnold. I say we just rapid fire them. Talk a little bit about some of the other, like, just really quickly go through some of the other shows, and then just talk about SpongeBob and call it.
Okay, we can do that. That's cool. Because I saw that we were already at an hour, and I'm like, holy shit. Like, we might be able to fit in a part two. I think if we would have... Yeah.
If we were to do a part two, we could, but the reality is it would be a real thin episode.
It would be a real thin episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, let's do it.
Okay,
right.
So let's rapid fire through some of these, because we definitely got to talk about the big one. So there was Rocko's Modern Life, which again had a lot of very adult humor in it.
Yeah. I think that was Ren and Stimpy 2.
Kind of, yeah.
In my opinion, yeah.
It was definitely.
But that was a good show.
It was a good show. It was definitely much more tame, but it was a good show. It was a lot more subtle, but that humor was still there.
Yeah, I remember my first memory of Rocko's Modern Life was his friend Hef.
Yeah.
The yellow cow.
Yeah,
having a heart attack or having a heart attack or choking on food, and he goes to hell, but instead of hell they call it heck.
Yeah.
I just remember that just being huge, like big and huge, like what's heck? You know, I just remember that. Yeah. But I remember the show. I remember loving the show. He worked at a comic book store, right?
Yeah. He worked at a comic book store, and then there was one episode where he was the whole thing is that he was a phone sex operator, but they wouldn't say it.
Yeah.
Like, it was just crazy.
Yeah, that was a good. I remember I think they also did a remake of that show, right? I think there was a reboot.
Very recently.
And they also made a movie on Netflix.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. I think it's just a movie on Netflix. I don't know if it's a whole... okay. I don't know for sure.
Oh, okay. I think maybe it was just a movie then. Yeah.
But a great show. A Wallaby. And then there's a Blue Collar Life, man.
Yeah.
Real Monsters. I remember... The only thing I remember about this show is there's an episode where... they're talking about the Great Wave because they live in the sewers. And it's basically on Super Bowl Sunday, everyone waits till halftime to go to the bathroom. And then everyone flushes at the same time, and the monsters ride that wave of essentially shit and piss.
That's disgusting.
And it's like, that's disgusting. But
the only thing I remember from All Real Monsters is the video game on the Genesis.
Oh, I never played that. I don't think I ever played that.
Yeah, I remember. I don't remember much of. I remember watching the show as a kid, but I remember the video game.
Yeah, so it was a good. That was a good one. Then we had Hey Arnold, which ran from '96 to 2004. Another example of not really dumbing down things for kids. It's about a kid who basically lived in a poor neighborhood with his grandparents. I remember. I looked this up. Do you remember Stoop Kid?
That's the episode I remember.
So
because I call one of my friends Stoop Kid.
I remember looking that up and then thinking, "Oh shit! Like this was kind of hard." Like Arnold tried to understand like why he was so mean, and it turns out that Stoop Kid like was afraid to leave his stoop, so Arnold like coached him into like getting better. So he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna." He gets off the stoop and now he can chase you.
Yeah,
and
I remember that.
It was like this great example of like sometimes shit just sucks.
And I remember Arnold having the coolest fucking room in the world.
Yeah.
He had a skylight. It was just the coolest room ever. I remember that. He was so cool. Yeah. Arnold was, I think, the character that you wanted to be. Because he was just so cool. Everybody loved Arnold. And he went home and just had the coolest room in the world. I just remember that. But I do remember him having somebody who was psychotically obsessed over him.
Yeah, I think her name was like Olga or something, right? Like Helga. Who was like the, I think in anime they call him the Sundari, right? Like she hates him but secretly loves him.
Yes.
But yeah, she had like a little shrine to him. I remember in like her room.
Yeah. In her closet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And beyond that, man, we had some of the other live action shows. Hey Dude, which was a weird fucking show. About kids that live, or like teenagers that worked on a dude ranch. The only thing I remember about the show is there was one episode where like the boss of the dude ranch gets stuck in a well, and they're like, "We don't have any food," and he's like, "We can go weeks without food, but without water, we'll go crazy within days." You know, it's just like, what the hell is this?
Yeah. I remember watching Hey Dude, but not as much as the one that we're going to be talking about in a little bit. Yeah.
Was it Salute Your Shorts?
Salute Your Shorts.
Salute Your Shorts was the shit.
Yes, I remember Salute Your Shorts. Yep. I remember Zeke the Plumber. I remember when you met, because we tend to talk about some of the stuff before we go on the show, and I'm like, I cannot forget when you mentioned Zeke the Plumber. It was like these flashbacks of Zeke the Plumber. Like, could not get over that. I remember that. I remember the puzzle when the guy from Terminator 2, when he did everything backwards, upside down, and I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. That was a good show. I remember that show being awesome. Yeah.
Donkey Lips, one of the great foils in all of kids programming. He was always the butt of the joke.
Yeah.
We got to talk a little bit about Clarissa Explains It All, because I had a mad crush on Melissa Joan Hart as a kid. Mm-hmm. Very much into the grunge style. She had a really cool room too. She had that little brother Ferguson, who was a pain in everyone's ass. Yeah, but I remember.
Who kind of reminded me of older Pete.
Kind of, a little bit.
Yeah. But then, I think isn't he the doesn't he play Kevin McAllister's brother in Home Alone?
I believe he does. Let me. I got a
different guy.
I gotta check that out. I gotta see.
Yeah. I think that might be somebody different.
Let me see.
All three of those guys look like Pete to me. Or him and Ferguson look like Pete to me. I'm not 100% sure.
I'm not 100%.
This is great podcasting.
This is good podcasting. This is good. Yeah. This is good. Who's this guy's name? His name is Jason Zimbal. And I don't... Let me see. I'll pull some of his stuff.
Okay.
Is this the right guy? I don't know.
From Clarissa Explains It All?
From Clarissa Explains It All. Let me see. See if this is it.
Yeah.
American actor. Yeah. Jason Zimbler. Who's now apparently a software designer. So I guess he just he left the business. Smart man.
Oh, okay. Smart man.
But no, man, that was a great show.
Yes.
I remember like it I'm sure, like, as a young girl, it was like a really big deal, but I really liked it too. Like, I was a big fan of it.
Yeah, I was a fan of that show too.
We got to
The
talk a
fact
little.
that her best friend would climb up the ladder
Yeah, and
and
was
just
basically
hang out in her room. Yeah.
was basically your stereotypical like grunge dude who was always like flanneled out.
Yep.
The last show we talk about before we get to the big one at the end, Are You Afraid of the Dark?
That show.
That
Do you
theme
have some
song.
information on that show?
So it was basically Twilight Zone for kids. It was like it was modeled around these group of kids that met every Saturday night or whatever at midnight around a campfire, and they would tell scary stories, and then the story was like the episode for the day. That theme song to this day is creepy as shit.
Yep.
It's not even really a theme song. It's like a couple notes and like creaking. But I remember that show being a big deal because, like, I'm sure a lot of horror kids got their first taste of that. Like dudes that are really into horror movies from that show.
Yeah. That was on Snick. I don't know if you remember Snick, but Snick was like their Saturday night.
It was their big deal.
Saturday nights, their big deal. Yeah.
I remember that.
The stuff that was on Snick was you only got Are You Afraid of the Dark once a week, and that was on Snick.
Oh man,
that's all you got. I remember my first one was a guy. I don't remember much of the show, but I remember my one specific thing is there was an episode where there was a dude that he loved the idea of death, and he wanted to lay in a hearse. He had this like obsession of wanting to lay in a hearse, and I remember him laying in a hearse. I don't remember if it was in a coffin in a hearse, but I remember him just laying in the hearse with his arms like crossed. And I remember just freaking out, never watching the rest of that episode because, like, this is too weird. Yeah, there were some episodes that I just couldn't deal with, but most of them I was able to. As a kid, right? As a kid, you're like, holy shit, I don't think I can do this.
Dude. Yeah, it was a weird show, man, and it really did kind of like I was creeped out by some of those for sure.
Yeah, agree. Yeah.
All right,
you know what creeps me out the most?
What?
Is the fact that this show is so popular. And what's the one that we're going to be talking about right now?
Okay, so I think if you're going to talk about modern Nickelodeon, there is really no
By the
other
way,
show.
that was a horrible segue.
It was bad.
That was a horrible segue.
It was sorry, but it's okay.
Sorry, horrible segue.
You really can't talk about modern Nickelodeon without talking about in '99 they came out with SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yep.
Now, 99 is a little bit after when I kind of stopped watching Nickelodeon, right? Mm-hmm. But you cannot deny the insane influence. SpongeBob SquarePants is on till this day. They're still making episodes. Mm-hmm. And the list of cameos by some really, like, from all different walks of life is insane on SpongeBob.
Yeah.
I mean, to this day, I know the theme song. And if I sing just the first line to kids, like, they all know what's going on. They all know what's happening.
Yeah. I feel like SpongeBob is the new Simpsons in the fact that
Okay.
Simpsons has been, well, what I mean is, let me finish that thought. What I mean is, The Simpsons has been around for 30 seasons, right? So over the last 30 years, you can say that people have grown up with The Simpsons.
Yeah, okay.
Now that SpongeBob has been around for 20 years now, 99 to 2021, 22 years. What I mean by it being the new Simpsons is that over the last 22 years, everybody has grown up with SpongeBob SquarePants. And it's because of the impact that it's had. Now you have movies and, movies, the cartoon, merchandise up the ass. Like, that's what I mean by that. Not the fact that it's the same type of show, nowhere near it, but just the influence that it's had on, the fact that everyone's grown up with it. I mean, who hasn't seen SpongeBob SquarePants?
Yeah. I mean, it is one of those shows that has just basically transcended. So since 99, it's been on in one iteration or other. I think they've taken a couple years off. So I'm looking at some of this, but yeah, man, like, what an insane run. And to go back to the list of guest stars, I'm gonna pull up this list because it's pretty fucking long and some very unexpected names.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, Jose from the editing room here, and just want to say I actually read the entire list and it took way too long. So to save you guys some time, just know that it's got some really cool names on it. But the ones we were most surprised with were Pantera, David Bowie, and Lux Interior from the Cramps, if you don't know. I don't know why I read the whole list, but I decided to cut that out. You're welcome. Anyway, look up the list because it's pretty amazing how many people have been on that show. Anyway, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, I was actually going to. We talked about this. I think we have on the show before, but the idea that all of these people that we look up to as kids and growing up, they're all parents. They all want to do something for their kids, and what better way to do it than to be a guest star on SpongeBob SquarePants?
Exactly.
Honestly, so I mean, the influence that this show has had. My first memory was actually watching the series premiere of SpongeBob SquarePants on Saturday morning. Oh. I remember watching it. I remember being like, oh, okay, cool. Like it's cool, but not really being obsessed over SpongeBob. Yeah, but I remember it just blowing up after that. But I actually do remember watching it, the series premiere. That's the first series premiere I've ever watched in my life, was the SpongeBob SquarePants one. Yeah. It's a good one. I mean, it's a good show. You can't knock on SpongeBob. I have nothing bad to say about SpongeBob. It's just it wasn't my cup of tea.
No, I feel you.
Yeah, but it's a big one. Yeah, man, this brings back so many nostalgia trips, right? Like, you just kind of look at these things and you think to yourself, man, like it's so much fun to do shows like this, because then we can, go back, like you said, you went back and watched the Mr. Tasty episode, and it makes me want to go back and watch my Bren and Stimpy DVDs again, or the Pete and Pete stuff. Maybe even just go on YouTube and find episodes of Nick Arcade or Legends of the Hidden Temple, because we didn't even get touch base on the game shows. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. I mean, this network was crazy, man. It was a good time back in the day.
Yeah. They even got the Ninja Turtle show on it now, which is actually pretty good. It's not too bad. I don't know if they still have it now, but a few years back they were airing some Ninja Turtle cartoons, and it was actually pretty good.
Nice.
Yeah, it was pretty good. So, let's segue over into the playlist of the week, which is our Nickelodeon playlist. I'm just gonna pick a handful here. Jose, do you have a handful of songs you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm gonna go first.
I can go first. I got a couple. I'm just gonna go rapid fire 'em. So because of Iggy Pop on Pete and Pete, I got Iggy Pop, Real Wild Child, Dames, Booze, Chains, and Boots by the Cramps, just to show you the kind of music those guys put out. Private Idaho by the B-52s, The Girl You Want by Devo, the song from SpongeBob SquarePants Pantera called Pre-Hibernation, an original song written by Pantera for the show, I Need Love by LL Cool J, and then, of course, Personality Crisis by the New York Dolls. I had one on there that I know is going to be on yours, so I'm going to let you talk about that one.
Okay. And I'm assuming it's the Ren and Stimpy's theme song?
No, it's Hey Sandy.
You got me. I was thinking that's what you were going to pick, but I ended up picking it myself, too. The Ren and Stimpy theme song is just one of my favorite theme songs of all time. Aside from the 30 Rock theme song, I those are just two that I can... how nowadays you can skip intros? Those and the Mad Men theme song are the ones that I just don't skip. I just really enjoy those theme songs. I Need More Allowance by Doug and the Beats, which is on Spotify. You have Hey Sandy by Polaris, which is the theme song to The Adventures of Pete and Pete.
One of the best theme songs ever.
Yes, absolutely. For the longest time, before the internet, I had no idea what he was saying. And then when I finally got to look it up, I was like, oh, that's what he's saying. Cool. I had no idea he was saying Hey Sandy for the longest time.
Yeah.
And I actually have a couple of songs that I found that I wanted to put on the Spotify playlist, because there's one show we didn't talk about, but is not necessarily near and dear to my heart, but Kenan and Kel is a show that I loved growing up on Nickelodeon, and they got their start on all that. And I remember all that having guest stars, which was basically like a kid's sketch show. And I went back on YouTube and I just looked some of it up, and these are some of the artists that were big in the 90s. Well, I mean, aside from Outkast, which is their song Rosa Parks, which they performed on all that. But one of them was Destiny's Child
Nice.
which was No No No. And the other one that I had to put on here because it reminds me of Total Request Live on top of Nickelodeon was Angel of Mine by Monica. And that was somebody...
Hey, it's Jose from the editing room again, and at this point, the Zoom call dropped. So there was some weird, awkward silence here, so I'm going to edit us back when we both reconnected. Anyway, back to the show.
This was a great episode, man. I had a lot of fun doing this with you today.
This is a fun one.
Yeah, fun one. But for those of the hashtag Road to 100 who want to follow us on social media, where can they find us?
Oh, let's go through all these guys. If you want to find the one-stop shop on the internet, you can go to halfstepdownpod.com. That's your one-stop place to see all of our links to all our different things. Things like our Instagram and Twitter. We are at halfstepdownpod. Check out the Instagram stories for previews of our playlists. You can find us on Facebook. We're facebook.com/halfstepdownpod. Look us up on YouTube. We post our episodes there. We decided that eventually we will start recording these episodes and putting them on YouTube, but we're going to wait till we're in person for that. Check out the Spotify playlist. Yes. The link is in the description. And, of course, please rate and review us on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast. And if you like what you hear, please spread the word to use hashtag halfstepdownpod or hashtag road to 100. And then finally, make sure you tune in every Thursday at 7 to Half Step Down Radio on titanradio.org.
Jose, I had so much fun doing this today. I hope that our audience can send us some comments or some reviews and just let us know what kind of shows, what kind of themes you guys want us to touch up on. We have a really interesting one coming up. We also have a guest coming up on our next theme, so that's going to be a lot of fun. So I think that one might go a little longer than usual, but I think it's going to be okay because you guys are going to get a fresh voice on this show. Because I know as the last two professional broadcasters, we'll be bringing somebody else to kind of make it a little more fun for us. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we'd always talked about having guests, and this next one should be fun.
Yes, it's going to be a lot of fun. Something that I actually know a lot about, so I think we're going to be okay.
All right, man. Well, I will see you later.
Right.
Another one?
I don't know if you were going to say something. It just got really awkward there.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. You know, we're kings of awkward silences, aren't we?
We are.
Yeah. Jose, happy birthday, my good friend. Everybody go on the Half Step Down pages and go wish Jose a happy birthday.
I'm not going to say anything.
The day that this show airs, on the day that this show drops, you can go and wish him a happy birthday. And Jose, how old are you going to be?
37.
37. In a row?
Oh, the joke again. All right.
All right, guys. Well, Jose, once again, happy birthday, brother. I hope you enjoy it, and hopefully we get to see each other soon. But everybody, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah,
see you guys.
Give it up for this guy. I promise you guys.
Just so we're all clear, that was not like a real song. Okay. I made that up.